Hi there. Thank you so much for listening to Grounded in Maine today. My name is Amy Fagan, and my guest today is Laura Hartley. Laura, I found through Podmatch, and she just my goodness, her bio just stood out to me because she sounds like I just felt like she was speaking for me, and I I love everything she stands for, and she feels like for me she feels like me, but like super smart and super what was the word that I used before, Laura? Just like you're just far ahead of me. That's what it is. So Laura, thank you so much for joining me today. I cannot wait to share your message with my people.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Oh goodness. So you said that you had a podcast that is still available. It is called the Public Love Project. Um,
It
and
is.
and you have a program that you are opening up next month, January. I mean, I guess this is going to be airing in January, so this month. But so you've got some really big stuff going on. So can you first just tell us about your podcast? Like what was that about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Public Love Project was a bit of an experiment around how do we use our head, heart, and hands in action. So how are we using our lives to kind of remake the world? So I got to speak to some great people over those episodes who are doing really cool things. So I highly recommend checking that out. But yes, I'm a leadership coach. I work with changemakers and climate leaders. And I'm also the founder of the Scintilla Centre, which is opening this month, if you are listening, to kind of equip change makers with the skills, the wisdom, the community that we need to really make the deep change that we need in this time to go to the roots of the crises that we're facing.
And I am so excited about that because it's there. I think that I've had this conversation with some folks in the past, but like we have the passion, we lack the like the steps. Like where do we start? What do we do? How do we um you know what I'm saying? How do we like form that and like gain more power and momentum?
Yeah. I mean, these are the questions that are normal for all of us to be asking, right? Because we're looking to make change on a scale that we have never seen before, as a collective society across the world. And, in many ways, we don't have the skills for that. We know what it is that we need to do. We know the solutions that exist out there in the world. We're just not doing them. And so I think asking this question of, oh, what is it that needs to develop within me? Where do I need to develop perhaps the inner qualities of like courage or clarity or confidence to be able to go out there with my ideas? Where do I need to develop the kind of relational stitching skills of like empathy and compassion and working across lines of disagreement and difference? Where do I need to be developing work with power and challenging systems of power? These are all the questions that we get to ask to kind of, I think, really to make the change that we want to make.
Yeah, you are speaking my language because that's kind of where I am. Like that's what, this podcast is supposed to encourage people and I'm just like I myself that's like the one thing that I was like I feel like I can do that. But as far as like more than that, we need to do more than just talk to people. We need to be in action and that's sort of where I fall short. And so this is super helpful for me. And I'm so excited for the chance to get to work more with you and talk with you. So tell us, let's see, I just want to say, I was telling you beforehand, but like when I was reading your bio, you had said that you're helping change makers to unlearn and dismantle systems that inhibit our thriving. And that's really deep and it sounds really big. Can you just talk on that a little bit?
Oh gosh, I mean, it is a big statement,
Right?
right? And a
A
big
little bit.
question. I I think in this time we need to go to the root of the crisis that we're facing. And at the root of the climate crisis is the systems that rule our world. One of these systems certainly is our economic system, it's capitalism, the system of the global north. And, capitalism is the leading driver of the climate crisis for a few reasons. One is its definition of success or its goal, which is always growth.
Mm.
Fundamentally, it believes in infinite growth on a finite planet. And I think it was Edward Abbey who said that growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell, right? Because everything in nature grows, everything grows, but it grows into maturity. And then it operates in seasons and in cycles. And we're not very good at actually doing that in our culture. Second is if growth is your goal, the number one way to drive growth is scarcity. Okay, because if you feel enough, if you are happy with what you have, if you feel satisfied, you don't need to keep growing and
Perfect.
consuming and
Yeah.
pushing, right? So scarcity is built into the system, and so many different ways that that shows up. We
Mm.
have planned obsolescence, the way we design devices to be single use or to kind of be non-repairable. We have it in like marketing, the amount of like buy now or like miss out products that we see, a lot of FOMO advertising.
Oh, yes.
And of course, the third principle in like capitalism, in why we're linking it to the climate crisis, is because it's built on this ideology that really devalues any sort of beautiful, living, complex system into a lifeless resource. Okay, so like jungles and oceans and forests only have value when we can take something from them. And like that might be timber or it might be tourism, but their value is only in our relationship to them, not inherently in their existence. And so when I'm talking about systems that inhibit our thriving, I'm talking about capitalism because it's driving the climate crisis that we're a part of. I think this system, when it lives within us, as it does, and as all systems do, inhibits our personal thriving. It leads to burnout and exhaustion, and we can talk about that.
Mm.
I think we can also look at systems when we're looking at the root of the crisis, like patriarchy, like supremacy culture, like the story of separation that we live in. But going to the root and going to the systems is always looking at the narratives that drive our world, the reasons things are the way they are. It's like us just asking that question, why? And
Mm.
then starting to kind of dig and inquire from there.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Right? I mean, I bet, I did not know that it was going to be like this exciting speaking with you. Like I knew that you had a lot to share and I was very excited about that, but I was like, this is this is very exciting. This is like firing up. Like this is, let's get our marching orders sort of like what we need to do. Because I mean, like I was saying, I talk a lot. I talk to people and that's, it feels better than not doing anything, but at the same time, like I feel like there's definitely more that we can do.
Yeah, although I just want to say, I think that's really important. Like, I think there is no one thing that everybody is supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I think the thing that we're supposed to be doing is the thing that we feel called to do and the thing that we have capacity to do. And
Mhm.
so, like, if that's conversations and opening up these ideas and spaces for topics and discussion and new ideas and new thinking, which is
Mhm.
one of the biggest things that we need in this time, right? Is imagination, new ideas, and creativity. Like, that is just so valuable. So I just want to like plant that seed there.
Okay. But like I've thought about, running for like a local, I don't know, local something or rather, but I'm just like, I don't know that I really have it. And so I think that's why I think that, speaking with you and maybe working with you might give, you were saying that courage and stuff like that. I feel like, we definitely need to beef up our local government and plant seeds earlier and not like try to go like huge way up in the, way up in the stratosphere. Like let's just aim really, really, really high. Um,
Oh, 100%. I think, local is where it's at.
right. And that, those people are also going to listen to the closer, the people that live there, the residents.
And that's really what matters in this time, right? I think even in doing this work, we are talking about big systems,
Mhm.
like and of course, a lot of the time when we think about, well, who am I to, dismantle patriarchy or capitalism or whatever it might be? And we start to feel overwhelmed.
And
But what we're really doing is bringing these systems down into like the microcosm. How do they live within me? How do they exist within my psyche, within my relationships, my values, my beliefs? Where can I start to unlearn them from the inside out? I'm a big believer that change is not top down, right? It's always going to happen in the little microcosms that we're a part of, in the microcultures that we can influence, our organizations, our faith groups. And so this is the place that we return to.
Oh my goodness. Excuse me. And so you were talking about you had mentioned doing the inner work for system change, and that's just like, and this is what we're talking about and what you're going to be talking about in your the Scintilla Center, I think. But just I feel like that is such a valuable place because I mean, like we've been saying, we know that things need to be done. We know that there's a lot to be done, but like where to start. And I know there was so I was telling you about the refill store back in Maine where I used to shop, but so the owner of that store, she was a podcast guest like way, way back. Um, Shout out to Laura, Laura of GoGo Refill. But she was, I was just like, I was singing her praises because I think that she's amazing. And she started the store, but it was more of like a movement because like again, like we know that there's just so much packaging and plastic and there's just so much waste. And for her to start this store, but she not only started the store, like she was writing letters to the government. And, I was like, you're literally showing us the way because these are things that we know that need to happen, but it's just like we needed someone to sort of like open the door and say, here's a start. And so I feel like it's just it's so important to have people like that and people like you that are like, let's look inward and see what we have inside us that we need to share and what we are capable of. And then, and like with the courage and stuff, like let's make you stronger and feel, ready to to take that on. But I just think I think it's wonderful. I think it's so important because, like I said, we're doing a lot of talking, but there's big stuff that needs to happen I'm going to stop talking because I'm losing my words as I'm talking. I'm going to leave it to you, Laura.
Yeah, no, I think, these conversations are really important, and you're right. We need to be taking action. And it is about doing the thing that we feel called to do in this time. I think I said at the beginning that we sometimes, when we're approaching sustainability, we're asking this question of like, well, what is the most important thing that I could be doing? Or, oh my gosh, so much needs to change. Where do I even begin? And I think what's the most important thing that we can be doing is that thing that we feel called to do, that thing that kind of lights us up on the inside, that, those ideas of callings that I think we all have. I think each of us has that little voice inside of us that says, yes, this, that thing that you've been thinking about for like the last 5 years, but you haven't actually done, and it just keeps kind of popping back into your head. Like that thing, that is a calling. Like
Right,
it is something from within us that speaks to us. And that is what we need in this time. Okay. Because we absolutely need change at the policy level. We absolutely need change at, all levels of government. But we need farmers, we need bankers, we need artists, we need teachers, we need nurses, we need all of these people reimagining the way in which they're working, all of these people coming up with creative ideas and something that speaks to them. And so, whatever it is that people are thinking of, if it's a zero waste store, if it's a community garden, whatever it may be, that's the thing. That's the most important thing that you can start to play with in this time.
mm, yes. I agree with that 100%. And it's so funny because I've been thinking about I was telling you I'm thinking about starting a I don't know about zero waste, but like bulk food and refill store here in my area, but also thinking about like community gardens. Because I'm a big supporter of farmers. I love the farmers. I love knowing where my food is coming from and that it's going to be healthy. Um, so I always make friends with the farmers, and I used to volunteer at a farm as a gardener. So I'm like, I don't know, they're my people. I want to be a farmer. I just can't do the heat. So
So does my wife. But like being realistic, actually, if we're looking in the next 5 to 10 years and the impact that the climate crisis will very likely have on food supplies and on like global bread baskets around the world,
Mhm.
community gardens are super important.
Yeah.
Like they seem small and like, oh, what does this actually maybe do? But no, this feeds people.
Right.
This is vitally important. So like all of this, it threads in together.
Yeah, totally. And it's also just yeah, there's just so much. I mean, as far as like education and also feeding ourselves and stuff like that, there's so many things and there, I have all these ideas and I'm like, I want to do all these things, but I know also in my heart I can't do it all as much as I want to.
I mean, I so relate to that. Like I'm one of these people that I want to do all of the things all at once. And
Yeah.
actually this kind of led to, some of the experiences that I had starting this work. When I was heavily involved in climate activism, I had this great crew of people. We did great work. I absolutely loved it, but I signed myself up to everything. And so
Hmm.
every night I was on a different organizing call. Every weekend I would be at a different action. And eventually I kind of reached this point where I was just spent and I
Right.
had like nothing really left. And I wasn't showing up to anything with the love and the integrity and the desire that I once had. I was showing up kind of resentfully and, not in a bad
I
way,
would
but like
take
out of
care of it. Yeah.
obligation,
Yep.
and I looked around and I wasn't alone in this. I found that within about a year of joining movements, a lot of people reach the state of burnout. And so, what I discovered in this time was really that it's not just about what we do, it's also about the way in which we do it, right? It's about the way in which we're working. Because a lot of the time, we are working in ways that are reflective of capitalism. Like
Mhm.
when I mentioned those three stages before, we're working in a way that is internalized of that belief system that says our self-worth is attached to our productivity and how much we produce. So we experience this sense of like time scarcity, this idea that there's just like never enough time.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all over our language. We say things like, time is of the essence, or I could squeeze 5 minutes in, or I wasted so much time yesterday.
Hmm.
So like time becomes something very linear and something that we're always racing against. I think that we often feel guilty or perhaps uncomfortable when we take time off for rest or for pleasure, like maybe I'm not doing enough.
Hmm.
We feel, again, I'm going to say uncomfortable, but I think there's a relationship to guilt there. So we go into work sick instead of like actually taking time to rest. Or a lot of the time, if we are resting, we're resting so that we can do more tomorrow because we've never quite done enough,
Right.
right? I think within this kind of mindset of capitalism, because this is a mindset, even self-work can become hijacked by this idea, right?
Hmm.
Mindfulness is a transformative practice, but if you Google it, I guarantee you're going to find 5 ways on how it can make you more productive. And so, yeah, and there's a lot of studies there actually, it kind of can, but like,
Sure.
the whole idea
That's
behind
not
that
the
instead
goal.
of, yeah, the tool of transformation that it really is, the way of being in the world. And so, what we're looking to do is this way of working it's almost violent in a sense, right? It overrides our body, it overrides our needs, it overrides our desires, our capacities. And one of the best definitions I've ever heard of burnout is doing uh, borrowing from your energy to just do one more thing and one more thing and one more thing until eventually you get to tomorrow and it's just not there.
Mm.
And so the way in which we're working is often reflective of the systems that we're trying to disrupt. And so I think it's imperative that we learn how to recognize the story of these systems, to recognize the story of capitalism, the story of patriarchy, the story of separation that exists in our world, these cultural narratives that flow throughout, and then for us to unlearn them. This is really what the inner work of system change is, the inner work of activism. It is far less about what are you doing and the one thing out there in the world. I think that is super important. We absolutely should be doing that. But there's also this inner component, changing the way in which we're working, asking what we're doing, why, and how.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Uh, oh, I don't even know where to start with that. I am totally guilty of like all those things. except for the mindfulness thing, because I just don't do it.
You and me both. You and me both. Like with time scarcity, oh my gosh, like,
Right?
my partner is always like, I'm like, hustle, let's go, and she's just like, can we just like chill? There is time, right? But we're not used to like feeling
Right.
like there's time. So
Right.
yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's why we have lists, right? You want to check everything off your list every day. And then, yeah, otherwise
And
you,
then you can rest. Yeah.
sure. Yes. And so to that, I mean, you were talking about finding what lights us up and working with that. And so from your bio, I loved the phrase steward your power. And that just hit me really hard that we need to find what we're like you were saying, what we feel called to do and just to, just feed that and to,
Yeah.
to grow that. Um,
I
oh
think we
gosh.
have a very complicated relationship to power a lot of the time, particularly depending on, our various identities. But like even when I say the word, like if you just say the word power, like I'm curious, how do you feel when you say that word? Like just what do you notice in like your body?
I feel icky.
Yeah, right? And it's really common that like we do. And it's because we are taught such terrible stories about power, particularly as women. If you think about a lot of the cultural stories about women who are powerful, you hear about the kind of Lolita, femme fatale, who's maybe like all her power is wrapped up in her sexuality. She's kind of a threat to other women. You've got like the nasty woman who like maybe has power, but like nobody actually likes,
Mhm.
And so again, who wants to be that? There are very few stories that tell us culturally that it's okay to recognize our own power, to care for it, to challenge it.
Mhm.
And so I think stewarding our power again is about recognizing power isn't money, it's not force, it's nothing outside of us. It's
Right.
simply the ability to make something happen. And so we have tools that we can get that generate our power. We have power that is embodied. And the more we start to challenge and question it, the more we let it grow and the more we can start to use it for good in the world.
Yeah. So how do we do that? I mean,
That's an
it's one of those like that sounds great. And I'm so guilty of that. Like like I said, power, the word power makes me feel icky. And so like it feels like a battle to get past that. And is that like how does that work?
Yeah. So I think there's a few different parts that we can look at. I think it actually starts with just acknowledging, yeah, how do I feel about power? I feel icky. Okay. What do I notice in my body? I think really reconnecting to our body is important here. Like, so we're staying out of like all the like, sometimes the stories we have, we kind of go there later, but just in our body, what do we feel? Can I sit with this? Can I notice it? Can I maybe interrogate some of the stories about power from my past? Maybe have I been betrayed by somebody who is in power, a teacher or an employer, or a parent, you
Hmm.
know, how has that influenced us? Can we start to unravel that? Where am I afraid of the consequences of using my power? Am I afraid that actually, if I'm really powerful, maybe people won't like me? Right? And it's a
Right.
really common one. Sometimes, yeah, people don't like you to be like too capable, too out there.
Mm.
Am I afraid maybe I'll have to take responsibility for some things that are a bit uncomfortable? There's nothing wrong with that. We all have this, So there's these questions are asked and they're asked in a very generative way. They're not asked with any malice or self-criticism. They're asked just about with honesty.
Hmm.
So we start to interrogate, okay, what's our relationship to power? I think then we can start to examine the different types of power that we have, right? We have the embodied power, the power of our choice, our agency. We all make decisions. We all have choices that we make.
Hmm.
We have power sometimes that's wrapped up in this idea of like privilege or identity. That some of us, depending on our identities, will have more cultural power than other people.
Right.
Sometimes we have power through relationships. We can start to think about what are the tools of power. If I want to make something happen, do I have networks? Do I have time? Do I have money? Do I have creative ideas? Okay, how could I start to use these as tools to steward my power, to use it?
Hmm.
So there's a range of things that we can look at. But I think the first step is just not shying away from it, right? We all exist in this world. We all have decisions. We all have different levels of power. It's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. Power is neutral.
Hmm.
Let's just get a bit comfortable with it just to begin.
Wow. That that's really helpful. I mean, as soon as you said, what is our relationship with power? I was like, why did I say icky? Like, where does that come from? And so that's really interesting because
I
like
will
that
tell,
it was so quick how that word just popped right out. Like, where did that come from?
and it's so often the case, right? So many of us experience that.
Mm.
I think, and it's always worth remembering, there are power structures in this world that benefit from people not having a good relationship to power and to feeling icky about power,
Mm.
right? Because when we feel icky about power, we are not challenging the systems and the structures that are causing the crisis in this world. Business as usual continues.
Right.
And
Leaving
so we
people
should
that do not have an issue with power to do their
to use
thing.
it in the wrong ways,
Yeah.
to use power to not for the benefit of all, but to use it for their own personal gain at the expense of others and the expense of the planet. And
That's
so it's
an
always worth
interesting
remembering
thought.
people benefit from us feeling this way. I
Mhm.
think it's the same with burnout, right? And we see burnout at a scale that we have never seen before. It's like, across the world, there's incredible studies about the amount of burnout that people are experiencing. And there's many different reasons for that. We could do a whole separate podcast on that. But again, systems, structures, they benefit from exhaustion because when we're burnt out, we can't challenge things. We don't have the energy. We lack the imagination and the creativity to reimagine the world. When we second guessing ourselves and doubting ourselves and experiencing imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
right? Again, systems and structures benefit because we're holding back our ideas. So there's a lot wrapped up, I think, in the even though I don't think it's like some big top-down thing that like, oh, one person is like pulling the strings. But I think that if we're looking at these systems, at cultural systems like capitalism or patriarchy or anything else that we're talking about, as almost being like a virus, almost being able to self-replicate, having like a feedback loop that keeps the system in place.
Mhm.
That is a brilliant feedback loop, that the result of living from the story of capitalism is exhaustion, and then you can't change it. It keeps it in place. The result of living from the story of patriarchy is shame and second guessing yourself and imposter syndrome, and you don't challenge it. Like we
Oh,
have to consider these things in a wider context, and I think that gives us a bit of freedom, a bit of
wow.
space to kind of hand back that story.
Oh my gosh. That is so wild. I so did not think about that. Like it's just not a way that I would think about that, but that's brilliant. And it makes total sense now that you've said it. I want to just like for the sake of time, like I'm very curious, Laura, where this came from for you. Like, have you always been somewhat of an activist with um have you always been somewhat of an activist? Like, was there a point where this like changed and you were like, I need to do something?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I think for me, I always see my work and these conversations at kind of the bridge of like inner and outer work. And for me, like the passion for our inner worlds came first. I was raised in an environment that gave me a lot of agency when I was quite young and the ability to recognize that I had an inner world and it could be cultivated. But I struggled when throughout my teens with severe depression and anxiety and like crippling mental health problems. And I was determined at one point to that this wasn't going to be my life. And I embarked on what was probably like a 10 plus year journey that I'm still on, actually. So probably like much longer now, um, about how can I live a more meaningful life? How can I make peace with myself? How can I find joy? And I explored lots of different modalities for that. So this love of big questions, this love of wisdom traditions, this love of kind of, the idea of the spiritual, or the sacred, I think is really important to me.
Mm.
In terms of like the outer work, which I think kind of came a bit later, when I was growing up, like I was taught that climate change was something that was happening like 100 years away and somebody else was going to have to deal with it. And
Totally.
like it was not something that was really on my radar.
Right.
I always had this kind of interest in the world and I became a bit more engaged. I started I did fundraisers for things like the WWF or, I did like beach cleanups
Right.
but it was a lot later that I really connected the dots and started to recognize how urgent the crises we're facing actually are. And
Mm.
at that point, it was like, oh, yeah, like, shit, we need to do something.
Right.
And then, yeah, diving into that, I got involved in lots of grassroots movements, in nonviolent direct action, in starting this idea of, well, how do we start to challenge the systems that are causing harm? And it was there that I started to think, there is a role for inner work here, right? Because it's not enough to just change the policy if we
Mhm.
don't change the mindset and the beliefs and the values that created that policy in the first place.
Mhm.
There is no winning when we say we create this opponent and we just have to defeat these other people that are out there. And if these people just disappear or we
Right.
win, the problems will go away. It doesn't work. And so
Right.
there has to be this inner dimension to the change that we're seeing in this time. And that was my bridge in to start to connect the two and to create this.
That is so brilliant. I mean, it's so true. I mean, we know that there are things that we need to do, but like like we've been talking about, like how do we get to that point of being like capable of taking that on? So this is just like this is a game changer for me at least. I'm so thrilled that we connected. And you said that I think you said that you started your first activist thing was at 17, is that right?
My first fundraiser, yes,
First
for the
fundraiser.
World Wildlife Fund would
Yeah,
have been
yeah.
about 17. I decided with a friend, we put up some posters. We got this hall at a discount. We reached out to some sponsors. I mean, again, this is the audacity of youth, right? Because you just don't know any different. And
Mhm.
so we reached out and we got like some prizes and some gifts and all of these things. And actually, it was a great event. What we didn't think about though being 17 was, when you leave like three or $400 on like just a table and don't think about it, how it might go walkabout.
Mm.
So I'm not sure it was by any means our most successful event, but that was my first kind of foray into this idea of, hey, something needs to change. What can we do about it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that's a super bummer about the donations, but what a great learning experience for you. So, that was, it was exciting until that happened, but at the same time you're like that won't happen again. I'll do better
Exactly.
next time. You
Lessons.
have to start somewhere. Exactly. But I had so and if you guys heard she said walkabout and I haven't really heard it come out of you until just then. But so Laura grew up in Australia,
I
right?
did. Yes.
And
Born and raised in
and
Sydney.
yeah. And but you are now in the UK. You're in London, right?
Correct.
London
Yes.
proper. Okay. But Laura's been all over the world and she has seen so much. And so she's making connections everywhere, which is so exciting to be able to share this message. Um, and I don't, I, gosh, I just, so I am so glad that you are who you are and that you've gone through what you've gone through because I think that your ideas are so, just like they're so current, like they're just ready for us who are just looking for that little bit of encouragement to really feed into what we know. Because I've always, just myself personally, I'm like I know that there's more here for me, but like how do I find that? Like how do I activate that, I guess. And so this is just so exciting for me and I'm so super grateful. And so what
I love having these conversations. So.
yay. And so Scintilla Center is starting in January, so it'll be live by the time this airs. Um, and so that's going to be like more of this work, is my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, so this work in a bit deeper. And so really the idea is it's an educational centers for change makers to develop the leadership, the wisdom, the imagination that we need in this time.
Mm.
I think we live in a space between worlds, right? There are systems and structures around us that are collapsing. And I think that that's a really hard conversation to have because a lot of the time when we start to say that, we just feel overwhelmed and powerless. And who am I to do anything? And I am one person, and what does my vote matter, or what does my decision matter?
I'm not prepared to take anything on.
Right? Well, yeah, especially when, as I've just said, so many people are at that level of exhaustion and burnout, they don't have the capacity to then deal with that kind of, existential threat. But the world that I won't say that I grew up in, but the world that existed, 50, 60, 70 years ago, where all you had to do was, follow the right steps, just go to the right university, get the right degree, get the job, follow the career ladder, marry the right person. Eventually, you're going to reach this place. And in this place, you'll be happy and everything will be okay. And that doesn't exist.
It doesn't
Like
exist.
the stability and the security of the world is no longer there. We do live in an increasingly volatile, unstable world. And I think acknowledging that is difficult, but gives us a lot of freedom too.
Mhm.
And so, if we're living in a space between worlds, as something is collapsing, there's always something being born. The question is, what do we want to be born? It is up to us in this time. And I mean that all of us, every single person listening, every single person in this world, to collectively decide, do we want it to be more just, more equitable? Do we want it to be more beautiful, more creative? Do we want it to be more conducive to flourishing? If we do, we need to start planting the seeds of that world. We need to be imagining it, creating it, prototyping it. And this is I'm not talking about like some big major idea for, revolutionary movement or business, although if you have them, fantastic. Like,
Right?
great. Let's talk.
Not mad at
Um,
that idea by any means.
but like I am also really talking about the hyper local, coming back to as we talked about, how would we start a community garden? How would we get more bike lanes? How would we create a network of support in our community? There are groups out there in the world who are starting to look at really different ways of being. What are the skills that we need? What are the skills we need to deal with conflict when it inevitably arises?
Hmm.
What are the skills we need to be able to kind of sit with deep uncertainty, to be able to pivot, when things change? These are all skills that the last 4 years have taught us deeply that we need. And so through Scintilla, I'm hoping to create the space for people to learn these skills, and also to meet people. Because
Hmm.
too many of us feel alone in this work. Too many of us feel like, you know what, I love this, I love listening to this, but like my husband or like my kids or like my neighbors, they don't want to hear about
Just
this.
me. It's just me. There's no support. Yes, exactly that. So building community.
Yeah.
Being-
And so that's really what we're focusing on. Was the community section? What are the skills that we need? And these are like really a lot of these are soft skills. They're inner skills that we're developing. We're not talking big and technical here. I'm not a scientist. Those are
Right.
not the spaces that we're working.
Yep.
But and then how do we develop the wisdom to use them well, right?
Shoot. Yes. Oh my gosh. I cannot wait. I cannot wait. My gosh. So Laura, this has been absolutely amazing, and I am so, so, so grateful for this conversation. I do just want to ask, as I ask everybody, what does the word sustainability mean to you?
Oh gosh. I love this question. And you know what? It's funny. Like, I often think about the definition of the meanings of words, and I'm not sure I really have thought about this one.
Hmm.
I think, I think what I choose for it to mean is about living in harmony with the natural world and living in relationship to life,
Hmm.
right?
Oh,
Life is
yeah.
always giving, it's always growing, it's always changing, it's always evolving. So, how are we living in accordance with the principles of nature? That's what I think sustainability means.
Beautiful. Wow. Okay. And so people are going to be hopefully as fired up as I am to learn to take things on and to learn how we can steward our power and just grow into that. So if people are feeling that, how can they find you, follow you, learn more, get into Scintilla Centr? Like how do we like become this person that we're meant to be?
Well, you're welcome to check out my website, which is laurahartley.com, or you can go to Scintilla's website, which is scintillacentre.com, and that is center with an R-E at the end, like with the UK spelling. Um, I'm also on Instagram at laura.h.hartley and LinkedIn if that is your space. So you can follow me on any of these platforms. You can join the newsletters. You'll hear about free workshops that we have, events, spaces to really engage with these ideas. So those
Right.
are the best ways.
Yeah. And folks, if you go to I looked, on Instagram, I looked up so on the link tree. So on her I guess it must be your like her website. There are free downloads and ideas that you can start with and things to get you set up to just get started on this. So she is, she's offering so much education and encouragement, even, without even taking any courses, but just, follow her, find out what she's doing, check out Scintilla Centr and, let's do some stuff. Like, let's get into action. Laura, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to leave us with?
I think just the idea that now is the time. Right? So whatever idea it is that you have, no matter how small, no matter how tiny, and if you don't have an idea, that's totally fine. But like, let's get creative. Let's start dreaming. Let's start playing. So whatever it is that you feel called to do in this time, do it. This is the permission that if you need it, to just go wild.
It's not too late. It's not too early. It's just
It's
now.
not just now. Now is the time.
Awesome.
Thank
Yes.
you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.